Today I'm out in Michigan driving the best electric truck in North America. This is the new Silverado EV. 440 miles of range, 754 horsepower, 10,000 pounds of towing capability, and the fastest DC charging available in North America. There is just one little problem. This RST is going to set you back at least $94,500 plus destination, and that is quite a lot. Let's talk about the elephant in the room first, and that would of course be the elephant-sized price tag. There's a logical reason for it. This has an absolutely massive battery pack, over 200 kilowatt hours in terms of usable capacity. Essentially, this is Ford Lightning plus Tesla Model X in terms of its battery capacity, and that's how we get to 440 miles of range. 450 miles of range if you get the work truck version. That's the other thing to know, is that Chevy says there will be less expensive versions of this truck soon, but keep in mind the work truck version with the vinyl steering wheel and the vinyl floors is already nearly $80,000. But that's what it's going to cost you to get the most epic electric truck in North America. Design-wise, this does not look like the rest of the Silverado lineup. And that's logical because it shares nothing with the gasoline Silverado. This is not a converted EV truck like we find in the Lightning or the upcoming Ram Rev. This is a dedicated EV truck platform with the Ultium battery technology on board. And that's why the front end kind of looks like Silverado swallowed by a Chevy Bolt, something along those lines. We have the distinctive light bar that we find in other Chevy EV products and the divorced headlight arrangement that we also see in something like the Equinox EV and the Blazer EV. And then if I press this button here, we have, of course, a front trunk. This is actually one of the few Ultium vehicles that will get a cargo area under the hood. We might as well talk about the cargo area while we're up front. We have just over 10 cubic feet of storage space here, which is less than the Lightning and less than we expect to see in the Ram Rev. But it's not too far off where we find the Rivian R1T, and loading cargo is easier because the load-in height is lower. In the R1T, it has kind of a 1970s truck feel where you really have to lift your bags up and over the grill in order to get things inside. The reason that we have a slightly smaller cargo area is, of course, that we have an adaptive air suspension. And this is a unibody truck, so there's extra structure in this area of the vehicle, and that's why the cargo area is only the inboard portion. We actually have maybe about 20 inches or so between the fender and this inside area. Chevy engineers tend to bristle when you describe the Silverado EV as a unibody truck, but it technically is. I think that's because customers incorrectly assume that a unibody truck could not be as rugged or as durable as a body-on-frame truck, but it all has to do with the way the unibody is designed, and that's why Chevy calls this a body-frame integrated unibody, essentially. So they have large frame elements underneath the vehicle, but they're welded to the body. And that allows them to have the signature feature that you would not be able to do in a true body-on-frame truck, the Midgate that we're going to show you in a little bit. Basically, it's a large portal between the bed and the cab, and that's part of why we find this structural element right here behind the rear doors. It adds extra structure and rigidity to the vehicle. Now, there is one downside to this design, and that is, since it doesn't have a traditional frame mounted accessories like running boards, rock rails, bed accessories, etc. from the regular Silverado are not going to bolt directly onto the Silverado EV. And that is a little bit different in the Lightning and the Ram Rev, where all of those accessories will bolt right onto those electric trucks without modification. According to Chevy, the design of the Silverado EV also made it easier to integrate the absolutely monstrous battery pack into the design. The battery pack actually spans from right about there to basically the bottom of the vehicle. It's a double-stacked Ultium battery pack that is quite tall, of course, because the capacity is so high. And because of that large battery pack, we have a GVWR over 10,000 pounds, 10,500 pounds to be exact, which is why we find the 8-lug wheels back here and relatively high load capacity tires. This is kind of a concern for some folks out there. I'm not sure where you're going to find an LT275 50R24 in a winter tire fitment at the moment, but you can be sure that if Chevy sells a lot of Silverado EVs, that those tires will come soon. Out back, the design definitely looks in line with the rest of the Silverado lineup. We have steps right there integrated into the corners, and we have the Multi-Pro tailgate. Of course, Chevy has a different name for the Multi-Pro tailgate, but since it launched with GMC first, that seems to be how it's always known, at least in my brain. This is quite simply the best multi-flip fold origami tailgate around because we have this really wide step here, and it has another function. If the tailgate is in this position, it allows you to keep longer items in the bed and keep them from sliding out the back. That is really, really handy because it means that you don't have to be quite as worried about those PVC pipes or whatever it is you're carrying spilling on out, especially with slippery items that are difficult to strap down. On the passenger side of the bed, we find power outlets. That's something we find in a lot of trucks out there these days. 7.2 kilowatts of inversion over here via a twist lock connector, and then two 2.4 kilowatt circuits with those 120 volt outlets. Unusually, we don't find any way to pump up your tires. That's something that GM really pioneered with a lot of their early SUVs. This has an onboard air suspension, but behind this little panel, which is kind of tricky to pull out, there's just a small storage area. The party piece for the Silverado EV is certainly this bulkhead here. Interestingly, it does not appear in the work truck version of the Silverado EV, just the rest of the lineup, but the glass is removable separately from folding down these lower panels. Now let's go inside and see how that's done. All right, let's fold the Midgate. Obviously, we're gonna be fast forwarding through portions of this, but it's pretty easy. We have little webbing bits there to fold that part of the seat forward. Then we have a lever here to fold this part of the seat forward, fold the headrests down right like that, and then repeat on the other side. The next step is to get rid of the window. So we climb in, pull these little levers right here, get a little bump stop, pull that off, window comes out, then gets latched into place right there like that. Now, if you want kind of a Toyota Tundra vibe, you could actually just remove the rear glass and have an open rear window if you were off-roading in your Silverado EV. There's also the option to not lower the entire bulkhead, but just 60% of it. If the glass is still in place, there's an interlock mechanism that will allow you to leave this side still in place, so you can still carry 3 people in here, but put really long cargo all the way to the back. And of course, with this in this position, you could go to that next step and just remove the window afterwards. Why might you want to do this? Well, obviously it's all about cargo carrying capacity. There's no such thing as an electric truck with an 8-foot bed in North America, except for the Silverado EV, which actually has more than 8 feet from those front seat backs all the way back here to the tailgate. That's especially handy if you're a weekend warrior because, think about it, things don't just come in 4x8 sheets, which will again fit completely inside. They also come in 10-foot lengths, and that would actually hang out the back of an 8-foot bedded pickup truck. Except for this one, of course. I'm also intrigued to see what the overlanding aftermarket does for this, because I could definitely see kind of a slide-in tent thing going on back here with a bed all the way up there, and really being able to utilize the fact that the air conditioning could stay on in the truck and keep your tent back here in the bed cool. In addition to the nicer interior and the Midgate, the other critical differences between this and the Silverado EV work truck I last drove is that we have more power out of the dual motor setup, and of course we have the adaptive air suspension, which we don't find in the work truck version. This does not get the insane tri-motor setup that we find in the Hummer EV truck because the mission of the Silverado is a bit different. This is designed to be a bit more normal truck, also a bit more cargo practical. So we have that Midgate flexibility of putting a lot of cargo in there that we don't find in the Hummer truck, and we find a slightly larger bed as well. But interestingly, neither one is going to get a full-size spare tire. Actually, no spare tire at all in the Silverado EV, although there's plenty of room in the front trunk. So theoretically, you could have actually still more cargo practicality in this than a gasoline Silverado, even if you put a spare tire in that front cargo area. Now, on the subject of the drivetrain, Chevy is not overly specific on the battery capacity. It's likely over 212 kilowatt hours in capacity, but GM doesn't really give us too many specifics. They're saying 440 miles of range in this, which is a hair lower than the work truck version. The work truck doesn't get as much horsepower because they said that a lot of fleet owners weren't really interested in giving their employees 750 ponies, and that makes a lot of sense. The game changer on this truck though is the charging speed. Actually, two charging speeds worth noting. This will charge at over 19 kilowatts on AC, and the charge door is right back here in this area. It is a standard CCS connector. There's going to be a J3400 connector eventually, but probably not for 18 to 24 months. Now back on the subject of charging. AC charging, nearly 20 kilowatts. The reason that's important is because 2024 is apparently going to delete the 19 kilowatt charging option on the Lightning. So this is going to charge faster on AC versus the Lightning, and it's going to charge considerably faster on DC as well. Over 350 kilowatts if you find the right charger out there. That's going to take this from 10% to 80% in 45 minutes. That charging time is pretty similar to the Cybertruck, the Lightning, and the R1T, but you're gonna get at least 100 more miles of range in that 45 minutes in this truck. And that is the big, big deal. Over 300 miles of range in that 45-minute window. And that means that if you're road tripping, your 10 or 15-minute stop is simply gonna get you more miles of range in this than in any of the truck competition. Since the Silverado EV shares nothing with the regular Silverado, not surprisingly, the front seats don't feel quite like the regular Silverado either. I find them actually a little bit more comfortable and perhaps a little bit more passenger car-like, I guess you'd say, in terms of the shape. We have a nice long seat bottom cushion, so taller drivers shouldn't have a problem, and gobs and gobs of headroom. If I put the seat all the way down, I have maybe about 4.5 inches of headroom in this model, which is a bit more than in the work truck version because I have this large sheet of glass above my head. We'll take a look at that in a bit. We also have 4-way adjustable lumbar support and of course seat memory over there on that side. A powered tilt telescopic steering column with a reasonable range of motion, but no power adjustable pedals like you might find in some trucks. It's pretty easy to find a comfortable driving position, and the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Jumping into the back seat, there is a ton of room. Just check that out, more than a foot of distance between my knees, and that driver's seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. Even if I scoot all the way over to this side of the rear, where we have the front seat all the way back in its tracks, I still have a solid 6+ inches of legroom. This is the kind of vehicle where you could very easily put taller adults, taller teens, or some of those really bulky rear-facing child seats and tall adults up front. The rear bench is just about as wide as the gasoline Silverado, and the floor is, interestingly, just about as flat, because most half-ton trucks have a flat floor, whether we're talking about an EV or not, but this is actually a little less flat than some. There is just a very tiny hump right there behind that center console. Now, on the center console itself, we get heated rear seats for the outboard seating positions and rear seat air vents with some red stripes there. We have a fold-down center armrest with cup holders, and of course, we have those flip-up rear seats, and under there is a somewhat small storage compartment. Not quite as much storage going on in here as, for instance, a regular Silverado, but of course we have the trick up this vehicle's sleeve where we can fold these seats down, and then we have that plastic area where you can load your cargo on top. Going in for a closer look, this is where the glass would latch into that rear seat back area. That's the button to fold down this 60% side, so you can fold that down right like that, again with that rear glass in place, or you can have the rear glass gone. Really handy cargo touches there. Some of the mechanism of the seat back is of course revealed in that area. This is where we find the top tether anchors. So you would actually tilt this seat forward like that, top tether anchor your child seat in, put it back into place, and then latch yourself in. That's a better look at that under seat storage area and that seat that tips forward like that. Those buttons are those rear heated outboard seats, air vents, and a small storage area. As we take a look around this interior, keep in mind this is the first edition, which is going to be one of the most expensive ways you can get your Silverado RST. And interestingly, you can only get this model in black and white at the moment. This is of course the black one because those are being built first. Over here we have slide to the side sun visors, but we don't have the dual sun visor setup, and the sun visors actually aren't quite as large as some of the half-ton trucks in the US. This big glass panel is one of the big differences between this and the work truck version, but as you can see, it doesn't go all the way back there to the rear passengers' heads because there needs to be a lot of structure back there in order for the vehicle to not feel like a wet noodle out on the road. And here you can see those latches for those rear windows a little bit more clearly. Moving back up to the front, we find height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests for the driver and front passenger. Sort of this tri-tone stitching going on here. So some of the stitches are charcoal to match the seat, some are blue, some are red, and then down lower on the seat back we also get some additional red piping going on there. The leather upholstery is perforated in the center of the seat because these seats are both heated and ventilated, As you can see, like most half-ton trucks, there's not terribly aggressive bolstering going on the front seats. Moving over to the front doors, we find a reasonable percentage of soft touch materials on the upper section of the doors, but to help improve durability, the entire lower part of the door is obviously made from hard plastics, including that speaker grille there. We have the Bose sound system in this model. Moving on up to the dashboard, we have more of that stitching going on the dashboard, but I have to admit that in this model, which bear in mind is a pre-production prototype, the stitching is not as even as I had expected it to be. It kind of has a wobbly line going on there. Soft touch materials in the upper section of the dashboard, obviously hard plastics lower on the dash, big storage cubby right there, and a pretty decently sized glove box below, but we don't find the dual glove box setup that we find in most half-ton trucks. Instead, we find a pretty low and pretty long dashboard design. They really wanted this interior to feel a little bit less bulky than some, but it also feels a little bit more cab forward, I would say, than the regular Silverado. Right here in the middle of everything, we have an absolutely enormous 17-inch touchscreen LCD infotainment system. It's actually just a hair longer than 17 inches from this corner all the way down here to that corner. That's how they measure it. Now, this does not have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, but before everybody gets incensed down there in the comment section about GM's future, the lack of CarPlay only applies to electric vehicles. I think that's still silly, but at least if you get a regular Silverado, you will still have smartphone integration. GM won't talk a lot about this, but there are two logical reasons. It's logically because they want the information for your routing estimations so they can give you more appropriate routing and charging recommendations, and they probably also want to make more revenue on the continuing online data connectivity subscriptions for the system. If you don't like that, obviously there are other trucks out there, or you could just deal with the fact that you could run this without the subscription, but you wouldn't have access to all the connected features. Lots of the options are up here in the touchscreen infotainment system, like the heads-up display, the auto parking system, the headlights, the one-pedal driving features. All of that is controlled via the touchscreen, but thankfully there are some physical controls down here for the climate control system as well. So not just touch buttons like we find in so many trucks out there. And of course, moving over to the steering wheel a little bit early, lots of buttons on the steering wheel as well. So we have buttons over here for things like the heated steering wheel, voice command, infotainment buttons, that multi-function instrument cluster. You can see lots of different drive modes, including a Google moving map display. There's also a full color heads-up display on top, so lots of ways of interacting with the data that the system is providing to you. Over here we have a paddle regen braking paddle, I should say, on this side of the steering wheel, but it's not adjustable regen, it's simply an on-off paddle. Also on the back of the steering wheel, we have track up, down on this side, volume up, down on the other side, and then back on the front, we have the controls for the Super Cruise system. That's why we have this little display right up top. Super Cruise is significantly more refined than the Ford Blue Cruise system, and this one will Super Cruise while you have a trailer connected, which is kind of a handy touch there. Over on this side, we find some additional controls for the vehicle, including the adaptive air suspension, ride height, and then over here, we have a regular trailer brake controller. I really appreciate that. Obviously, we find a regular trailer brake controller in the Ford and the upcoming Ram EVs, but in the Rivian and the Tesla, you have to use controls on the screen and controls on the steering wheel to actually adjust your trailer brake gain. Going back to the center console, we find two USB ports there. Those will interface with the system if you have the appropriate media device, but again, no smartphone integration. Wireless charging mat there. Two big cup holders here and a large storage area where you can keep your smartphone when it's all sad and alone and not projecting anything. Silverado First Edition logo right there on that center armrest, two big cup holders behind, and then, as you'd expect, lots and lots of storage going on here in this middle seat area. And you can also move this center section back and have access to even more storage under it. They say it's 7 gallons of storage all the way from in front of that deep storage area there, all the way back there into that area. You'll also find some additional storage space in these small pockets on either side of the center console. So there's one over there for the driver and one over there for the front passenger. We then have a soft touch insert on top. It's sort of a rubbery insert there, and then hard plastics lower. All right, it's time to get the Silverado EV out on the road. The first thing we should talk about is towing, of course, since this is an electric truck. This particular trailer is about 18 feet long. It's a box cargo trailer with a weight of around 5,000 pounds. Let's get out on the road. Now, the first thing we should talk about when it comes to towing capacity is versus the competition. This is not necessarily the highest tow rating, but bear in mind that at the moment there is no such thing as an electric truck that allows fifth wheel or gooseneck style connections. So everything is going to be conventional trailering. And in most states in the country, you can't actually tow over 10,000 pounds conventional without a Class A. And in some states, actually, the GVWR of this truck is already high enough that it would make some of those bigger trailers a little hard to do anyway because some states go by gross combined weight rating. On the other hand, the curb weight of the Silverado EV ends up being a little bit of an advantage when it comes to trailering because honestly, this truck doesn't really feel like there's 5,000 pounds back there. It is still incredibly peppy. There's lots of get up and go. There are no gears to shift through, so that power just happens really instantly. Something that I noticed immediately is that in the Silverado EV, one pedal driving still works with a trailer connected to the back, and it's pretty aggressive at braking the vehicle. That's not what happens in the Lightning. In the Lightning, when you engage the tow haul mode, it actually dials back the regenerative braking. So when we had a Lightning for a year, I found that it was a lot easier to tow when you were in sport mode because that actually gave you more aggressive regen, but it didn't have all the same sort of tow haul software tweaks and changes that you would get in the tow haul mode. I really love the fact that Chevy has done this because I live in a mountainous area and keeping control of a 10,000 pound trailer going downhill, you know, it's a lot easier if you have aggressive regen braking because it means you can save your friction brakes for when you need them in a panic maneuver. And in something like a Lightning, even though there's a lot of battery capacity you could be stuffing electricity into, it actually stops pretty darn early, leaving you just with your friction brakes on some of those downhill slopes. And in something like a Rivian, it really dials back that regen even when the battery is lower in its state of charge range when you're towing a trailer for reasons that I have never fully understood. The next thing we should address is what's my range going to be like with a trailer on the back? To be perfectly honest, there is no singular answer for this. But if you are the kind of person that tows regularly, you can answer your own question because the range drop in an electric vehicle like this is going to be substantially similar to the range drop in a gasoline or a diesel vehicle. We actually have some videos on that on the channel as well already, so be sure and check those out if you want even more detail. But if in your current vehicle at 55 miles an hour, you're getting 20 miles per gallon. You connect a trailer to it, you get 15 miles per gallon. You would experience an approximately similar 25% range loss in this truck. If you get a 50% range loss, just translate that out with the Silverado EV. The next thing I would say is if you're really concerned about towing range, keep in mind that this battery pack is going to charge its quickest between 10% and 80%. It's really going to slow down on that upper level. So you really want to plan your trips and your towing adventures around that charging window. Sometimes that may mean stopping a little bit earlier than waiting all the way till you get down to 10%. Sometimes that may require that you actually wait a little longer to charge all the way to 100%. I won't blow any smoke up your skirt. It's not going to be the same experience as gasoline, but I would say if you're adventurous and you're willing to give it a try, it's not going to be nearly as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. Speaking of being adventurous, right now we're in the Super Cruise mode because it does work with a trailer connected, and it is again a lot smoother than Blue Cruise, and there are more miles of road that it's enabled on. It's going to be over 750,000 miles of roadway by the end of 2024, and that includes a lot of rural roads like the one that we're on here, or a lot of the farm to market road network inside Texas. It's a really handy feature, and as you can see in traffic, we're slowing down here. It does an excellent job of keeping the trailer in check, braking, accelerating, keeping it in the lanes appropriately. It will even move over in the lanes if it's passing a semi in the lane next to you, and it changes lanes all on its own to pass traffic, to stay in the correct lane, so it'll move out of the passing lane, not camp out there, etc. Super Cruise is a fantastic feature. Let's talk about the rest of the way the Silverado drives. 0 to 60, if you are not using the most aggressive drive mode, happened in about 5 seconds. Keep in mind, we're not testing this at home, so these are preliminary numbers only. But it was just over 5 seconds, 0 to 60, in its regular drive mode. If we enabled the highest output mode, which they're calling watts to, not watts to freedom, it's wide open watts, because there are some differences between the terminology used in the Hummer lineup and in the Silverado lineup. At any rate, in this vehicle, in that mode, you will get 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds in our testing, but keep in mind, there was a reasonable amount of scrabble. So if you have a perfect road surface, it could go even faster. And honestly, that actually applied to the 5.2 second 0 to 60 time in normal mode. There is so much power from this system that you have to have a really good road surface to be able to apply it all. Also, if you floor it, you will get a hint of torque steer because we have a really powerful motor on the front axle. We see that in a lot of electric vehicles with high horsepower numbers as well. The number that I was a bit more concerned about actually seemed better than I had expected. 60 to 0 happened in 128 feet in this truck. That is not exactly short, but it's not as much longer as I had expected. Now, keep in mind that if you're in inclement weather, rainy, snowy, icy weather, etc., it is going to be longer than the average half-ton truck, but 128 feet, it's actually substantially similar to a regular Silverado. So, although I was a little bit concerned about the weight as far as some of those numbers, it actually doesn't seem to be too much of a problem as far as panic stops with the tires in the condition they are now, of course. Now, on the other hand, handling ability is definitely going to be compromised by the weight. This has a really low center of gravity, so it has a really nice, solid feel. But if you start driving it a little bit harder without the trailer connected to the back, you will certainly notice that it feels heavy. And, of course, it's because it is heavy. On the other hand, if I quiet down the fan here, you'll notice there's not a lot of road noise. In fact, there's not a lot of any kind of noise. The little whirring that we're getting here, that's all digital noise being created by the infotainment system. I'm not sure why car companies continue to insist on doing that, and if you really like it though, you can dial it up even further by engaging the watts mode there, and then we have even more digital noise into the cabin. Interestingly enough, you can also engage that mode with a trailer connected, so we get the jumpiest throttle and the soundtrack with 5,500 pounds in the back. So, you know, lots of definite fun here. Ride quality, definitely very good, although it's not a world apart from the work truck, which did surprise me a bit. We have the adaptive suspension system in this model, and I had expected that to make the ride a little bit more supple, a little bit more like a Ram 1500 with the adaptive air suspension, but this is always going to feel a little bit more like a crossover or more of a sporty feeling truck than I had expected. Thanks to the adaptive suspension system and the independent suspension, however, the rear suspension doesn't become upset over broken pavement. So on some of the really poorly paved roads around Detroit that we were driving this on earlier, it has a really solid, stable, and honestly a bit more crossover-like feel than the average pickup truck. Now that particular feel is not unique to the Silverado EV, because I would honestly describe the Lightning in that same way, also the Cybertruck, for the exact same reasons. They also have four-corner independent suspension systems. The Cybertruck, of course, has an air suspension, as does the Rivian. The Lightning makes do with the regular steel spring setup. When it comes to efficiency, keep in mind that we're driving a big, heavy electric truck with relatively wide tires, and of course, this truck has that trailer on the back. So for this particular short jaunt, we've been averaging 1.1 mile per kilowatt hour. It went up to 1.4 if I take a look at the trip computer for the last 700 miles in this truck, which has been the one demoing the trailer, running around the test loops here. And that expands a little bit further out to 1.7 miles per kilowatt hour on our daily driving loop that we were doing out here around Michigan. If you treat it gently and you keep your speeds to under 70 miles an hour out on the highway, you could average about 2 miles per kilowatt hour. That's pretty close to the efficiency rating of the Rivian, the Cybertruck, and the Lightning. Bottom line, out on the road, the Silverado EV is a blend of exactly what you'd expect and just a few surprises here and there. It certainly feels big and heavy out on the road. It's isolated, it's quiet, but it's also wicked fast. It stops a little bit sooner than you might expect, and it will handle a little bit bigger than you might think as well. Tricky thing comes when maybe you're on a gravel road and you're pushing it a little bit too hard, or you're on an icy or a snowy road and you do the same sort of thing. Keep in mind, the curb weight is right around 9,000 pounds. So that is going to be something that's going to affect this on some of those road surfaces. It's also going to mean that if you want to go ice fishing, something along those lines, keep in mind this is going to be a lot of weight for the ice to support. And depending on the kind of off-roading you're doing, this may get stuck in the mud a little bit more easily than some as well. As much fun as the Silverado is, and as practical as this RST is, there are two problems that we should address. Obviously, there's the lack of CarPlay inside. That's going to be a big problem for some shoppers, but the bigger problem is going to be the price tag. $94,500 is where the Silverado EV starts. Of course, the Cybertruck is pretty darn expensive, but the Lightning is a lot less expensive. Let's dive into that a bit. Now, obviously, the Lightning has a smaller battery pack. Even the extended range battery pack, which gets closer to this in terms of its price tag, is considerably smaller, and your real-world range will be considerably lower. Even at around 70 miles an hour, this should be getting nearly 400 miles of range. And in a Lightning, you're going to be somewhere around 275 to 280 miles of range if you keep it under 70 miles an hour. So certainly considerably longer range in this. And thanks to its 800-volt battery pack, it can charge considerably faster than the Lightning. Again, 10% to 80% charge time, it's about the same, but you're going to get at least 100 more miles in this than you will in the Ford. This is really just a case of you got to pay to play. This is fantastically expensive for an electric truck, even in the relatively expensive electric truck window that we have in North America, but it is the ultimate pickup truck as well. Is the price tag worth it? I will let all of you decide. Let me know down there in the comments section below. I will say you can get a pretty long-range max pack in the Rivian R1T, but it's going to be a smaller truck, and none of the competition is going to have the practicality of this Midgate. For me at least, that Midgate feature is one reason alone to get a Silverado EV. To be honest, it's also one reason that I would love to see something like a Chevy Avalanche return, something based on one of Chevy's big full-size SUVs, say Chevy Tahoe, just like the old Avalanche, of course, that had the Midgate function and the pickup truck practicality to go with it. But for me, I would probably save the money and buy something less expensive or wait for a smaller battery pack to come in the Silverado EV. We know that's probably going to happen soon, so be sure and stay tuned for that. And of course, stay tuned for the Sierra EV because that's coming from GMC and it's going to look a little bit more premium on the inside, a little bit different on the outside, but probably also be even more expensive. Let me know down there. Hit us up at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the other social places. See all of you next week.